A billionaire invites a homeless man to dinner out of charity and can't swallow his food when he hears his name. The chandeliers sparkled, the smiles were rehearsed, and the waiter almost pushed the dirty man out. But the billionaire, with a theatrical gesture, invited the homeless man to dine beside him, for charity, for the cameras. The room applauded. The cameras zoomed in. But when the man said his name, the billionaire choked and couldn't swallow another bite. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton in Manhattan sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the glimmer of designer gowns. Daniel Whitford, a 41-year-old tech billionaire, stood tall in his custom Armani suit, sharing practice smiles with photographers and benefactors alike. "Mr. Whitford, your charitable foundation has raised over $20 million tonight," announced the master of ceremonies. "Would you like to say a few words?" Daniel approached the microphone with the confidence of a man accustomed to commanding attention. His jet black hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place, much like his carefully curated public image. "Generosity isn't measured by how much we give," he began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "but by who we're willing to share our table with." A flash of inspiration, or perhaps a calculated publicity move, struck him. Daniel pointed toward the entrance, where security guards were politely but firmly escorting a disheveled man back outside. "Wait!" Daniel called out, his amplified voice freezing the entire room. "Bring him in!" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Camera flashes intensified. The homeless man stood awkwardly at the entrance, his weathered face a stark contrast to the polished opulence around him. His clothes, layers of mismatched items, carried the unmistakable scent of the streets. "Sir," Daniel gestured toward the empty chair beside him at the head table, "would you join me for dinner tonight?" The photographers scrambled for position. This would make tomorrow's front pages. The man hesitated, then nodded once, a subtle dip of his chin. He followed a visibly uncomfortable waiter to the seat of honor. Daniel watched the man settle into the velvet chair. Something about his eyes, deep-set, grayish blue, stirred a strange familiarity that Daniel couldn't place. "What's your name?" Daniel asked, loud enough for nearby microphones to catch. The man looked up, his gaze steady despite his surroundings. "Thomas Benedetti," he replied, his voice surprisingly clear. The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. His hand froze mid-air, the silver fork slipping from his fingers and clattering against fine china. That name, his birth name, the one he'd spent decades burying beneath awards, acquisitions, and achievements. The grand ballroom fell deadly silent. Daniel managed to disguise his shock with a sudden coughing fit. "Excuse me," he choked out, rising quickly from his chair. "I need some air." As he retreated toward the exit, he caught the reflection of the homeless man in a decorative mirror. Thomas had lowered his eyes, a mixture of recognition and resignation on his face. For the first time in 37 years, someone had called Daniel by his real name. And instead of embracing this ghost from his past, he had run away. Outside in the hallway, Daniel loosened his tie, gasping for breath. How could this be possible? Thomas Benedetti was supposed to be dead, a casualty of the fire that had consumed their orphanage when Daniel was just 4 years old. The same fire that had given him a second chance with a wealthy family, a new name, and a future paved with opportunity. But if Thomas was alive, what else had been a lie? Back in the ballroom, cameras continued to flash, capturing the abandoned homeless man at the billionaire's table, unaware they were photographing the moment when Daniel Whitford's carefully constructed world began to crumble. Dawn broke over Manhattan, painting Daniel's penthouse windows with golden light that failed to penetrate the darkness consuming him. He hadn't slept. His pristine living room now lay strewn with papers, birth certificates, adoption records, and old newspaper clippings, all bearing the name he'd spent decades trying to forget. "Thomas Benedetti," he whispered. the name feeling foreign on his tongue. Memories flickered like the flames that had supposedly taken his brother's life. A hand holding his as they huddled together on a thin mattress, a voice singing softly when the night terrors came. His phone buzzed incessantly, his PR team, board members, the foundation directors, all demanding explanations for his abrupt departure from the gala. Daniel ignored them all. Instead, he dialed a different number. "Reeves, Security and Investigations," answered a gruff voice. "This is Daniel Whitford. I need your most discreet investigator. Price is no object." 2 hours later, James Reeves sat across from Daniel in his home office, listening impassively as the billionaire recounted his encounter. "So this homeless man claims to be your brother," Reeves summarized, jotting notes. "He didn't claim anything," Daniel corrected. "He simply stated his name, a name I haven't heard in nearly 4 decades. Reeves raised an eyebrow. "The brother you thought died in the fire?" "Yes." Daniel pushed a yellowed newspaper clipping across the desk. The headline read, "5 children perish in orphanage fire." Below it, a list of names, including Thomas Benedetti, age 8. "If your brother died in that fire, who was at your gala last night?" "That's what I'm paying you to find out," Daniel snapped. Then, more softly, "And if he is my brother, I need to know where he's been all these years." After Reeves left, Daniel pulled out a fireproof safe hidden behind a painting. Inside lay the only possession he'd kept from his life before becoming Daniel Whitford, a child's drawing, edges charred, showing 2 stick figures holding hands. In the corner, written in crayon, "Tommy and Danny B." His adoption had been rushed, unusual. The wealthy Whitfords had taken him in immediately after the fire, changing his name and moving across the country. A fresh start, they'd said, forbidding any mention of his past life. Daniel's assistant interrupted his thoughts, appearing at the doorway. "Sir, there's someone from the New York Children's Services Archives online too. They say they've found something." Hours later, Daniel stood in a basement archive room, watching an elderly archivist struggling to open a water-damaged file. "Most records were destroyed in the '89 flood," she explained, "but we keep finding bits and pieces." She handed him a partially burned intake form. Daniel's eyes fell on the words that shattered his reality. Thomas Benedetti, survived fire. Brother Daniel adopted by Whitford family. Thomas placed in foster system. Brothers separated by court order. His hands trembled. A court order. Deliberate separation. "There's more," the archivist said softly, passing him a small envelope. "This was meant to be given to you when you turned 18. I don't know why it wasn't." Inside was a faded photograph of 2 boys and a folded note in childish handwriting. "I'll find you someday. Promise. Tommy." As Daniel stared at the photograph, a memory crystallized. His brother tying his shoes, patiently showing him how to loop the laces. "Like this, Danny. See, you're learning fast." Shame washed over him. While he'd been living in luxury, building empires and accepting accolades, his brother had been searching for him, surviving homeless on the very streets Daniel's limousine glided through daily. Daniel grabbed his coat, determined. He hadn't actively forgotten Thomas. He'd been made to forget. Now he needed to find him again. But was it to ease his own conscience, or to truly reconnect with the brother who had protected him all those years ago? As he stepped into the street, Daniel realized he had no idea where to begin searching for a homeless man in a city of millions. A man who, after their brief encounter, likely wanted nothing to do with him. The February cold cut through Daniel's cashmere coat as he wandered through the shadows beneath Manhattan's bridges and overpasses. Places he'd never noticed before, despite living in the city for 15 years. The invisible world of the forgotten. "I'm looking for a man named Thomas Benedetti," he repeated to each huddled figure, offering $20 bills that were sometimes accepted, sometimes ignored. By nightfall, Daniel's hand was empty of cash, but full of nothing else. No one knew Thomas, or no one would admit to knowing him. "Rich folk only see us when they want something," muttered an elderly woman wrapped in a patchwork of blankets. "You lose something valuable down here, mister?" The question struck Daniel like a slap. Yes, he had lost something invaluable and hadn't even known it was missing. On the third day of searching, Daniel found himself at the Bowery Mission. The shelter administrator, a weary-eyed man named Rodriguez, studied the photograph Daniel slid across the desk. "Yeah, I know him." "Not by that name, though. We call him Piano Man." Rodriguez sighed. "He comes in during the worst winter nights, but never stays till morning. Proud man, doesn't talk much. Piano Man. He can play like nobody's business, classical stuff mostly. Sometimes he gets permission to use the piano at St. Mark's Church, brings in a few dollars when tourists drop coins." Daniel's throat tightened. Their father, before he disappeared, had played piano, had taught Thomas some basics. "Was he here last night after the storm?" Rodriguez shook his head. "Haven't seen him in a week." As Daniel turned to leave, Rodriguez called after him. "You might want to talk to Mabel Jenkins. She worked at the Brooklyn Home for Children back in the 80s. Still volunteers here sometimes." The next morning, Daniel sat across from Mabel Jenkins in a coffee shop near the Mission. She was in her 70s now, but her eyes remained sharp, evaluating. "You're little Danny Benedetti," she stated, not a question. "I'd recognize those eyes anywhere. You look like your mother." Daniel flinched. No one had mentioned his mother in decades. "You and Tommy were inseparable," Mabel continued, stirring her tea. "After the fire, Tommy fought like hell to stay with you, physically fought the social workers who came to separate you." "I don't remember," Daniel whispered. "You were sedated, child. You'd inhaled smoke, were in shock. By the time you woke up, the Whitfords had already started the adoption process just for you." "What happened to Thomas?" Mabel's face darkened. "He was older, traumatized, angry. The perfect child for adoption you were, the problem child he became. Bounced through 6 foster homes before he ran away at 16. She reached for Daniel's hand. "He used to break into school buildings at night to play their pianos. Music was his only comfort after losing you." Daniel's phone buzzed. Reeves with an update. A homeless services coordinator in Harlem remembered Thomas from hospital visits and mentioned a public piano in a small park where he sometimes played. Within an hour, Daniel stood before a weathered upright piano in Marcus Garvey Park. Protected by a simple awning, the instrument bore the scars of exposure and use, much like the man he sought. No one was there, but taped to the bench was a name written on masking tape: Tommy. Beside it, secured with more tape, was a small blue button. Daniel stared at the button, his mind flooding with a forgotten memory. Thomas giving him his blue coat button to hold when Daniel was scared at night. "Keep it safe for me, Danny." He had kept it safe until the night of the fire, when chaos erased everything. Daniel pocketed the button, tears blurring his vision. Somehow Thomas had kept this connection alive, this memory intact, while Daniel had buried it all beneath wealth and achievement. A teenager approached, curious about the well-dressed man crying at a street piano. "You looking for the piano guy? Tall dude, gray beard?" Daniel nodded, unable to speak. "He plays here sometimes around sunset. Sad songs, man, like heartbreaking stuff. People make videos. He's kind of famous on TikTok, but nobody knows his real name." As darkness fell, Daniel reluctantly left the park, but promised himself he'd return tomorrow, and the day after, for as long as it took. What he didn't know was that Thomas had been watching from the shadows across the street, recognizing the brother who no longer recognized himself. Daniel returned the next evening, settling on a bench with a clear view of the piano. The February chill penetrated his heavy coat, but he remained still, a stranger in this neighborhood where children played basketball despite the cold and old men gathered for chess at concrete tables. Hours passed. The sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the park. Then, as twilight gathered, a tall figure approached the piano. Even at a distance, Daniel recognized him from the gala. The same weathered face, the same deliberate movements. Thomas wore layers of mismatched clothes, a knit cap pulled low, his beard now visible in the fading light. Daniel's instinct was to rush forward, but something held him back. Instead, he watched as Thomas settled on the bench, arranging himself with unexpected grace. The homeless man sat motionless for nearly a minute, hands hovering above the keys, as if in prayer or remembrance. Then he began to play. The melody floated across the park, hauntingly familiar, achingly beautiful. Daniel closed his eyes, transported instantly to a small room with peeling wallpaper, where two boys huddled together on a narrow bed while their father played this same song downstairs. A lullaby. Their lullaby. Passers-by slowed, some stopping to listen. A young boy, no more than 8, pulled out a smartphone and began recording. Daniel remained frozen, tears streaming down his face. The music spoke directly to the child he'd been forced to forget, awakening memories long buried. Thomas teaching him to tie his shoes, Thomas sneaking extra bread from dinner for him, Thomas standing between him and the older boys who'd tried to take his toy car, Thomas protecting him, always. When the song ended, several people applauded. Someone tossed coins into a cup beside the piano. Thomas acknowledged them with a quiet nod, but didn't speak. He began another piece, this one classical, perhaps Chopin. His technique imperfect, but played with raw emotion that transcended training. His fingers, though weathered and rough, moved with surprising dexterity across the keys. Daniel couldn't tear himself away. He watched for over an hour as Thomas played piece after piece, each one seeming to tell a chapter of their shared story. Eventually, the park lights flickered on. The basketball game ended. The chess players packed up their pieces, and the audience around the piano dwindled. Only then did Daniel find the courage to approach. He moved slowly toward the piano, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel path. Thomas's hands stilled mid-measure. Without turning, he spoke, his voice low and rough. "You came back." "I never should have left," Daniel replied, his voice breaking. Thomas finally turned, his eyes, so like Daniel's own, studying him intently. "You were just a child, 4 years old, not your fault. I meant at the gala I shouldn't have walked away." A flicker of something, disappointment perhaps, crossed Thomas's face. It was quite a shock, I imagine. Finding out the dead don't always stay buried. "They told me you died in the fire." Thomas's laugh held no humor. "And you believed them? Easier that way, wasn't it?" Before Daniel could respond, Thomas stood abruptly. "It's getting late. They lock the park gates soon." "Wait," Daniel pleaded. "Please, can we talk? I can get us dinner, a hotel room for you. I don't need your charity." Thomas gathered a worn backpack from beneath the piano bench. "You already tried that at your fancy party. It's not charity. You're my brother." "Am I?" Thomas looked directly at him now, his gaze unflinching. 37 years, and you never once looked for me. I may be homeless, Daniel Whitford, but I've got my dignity." He turned to leave, then paused. "I saw you here yesterday and the day before. Why now, after all this time?" Daniel had no answer that didn't sound selfish or hollow. Thomas nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "That's what I thought." He walked away, disappearing into the gathering darkness. The next morning, Daniel returned to find the piano gone, removed overnight by city workers after complaints from a local resident. A notice taped to a pole cited unauthorized public performances as the reason. As Daniel stared at the empty space, a street cleaner approached, Looking for the piano. Some folks took it last night. Shame, really. Music was the only good thing about this block. Did you see who took it? City workers, I guess. But the piano man left something. The cleaner handed Daniel a folded piece of paper found near where the instrument had stood. Written in shaky handwriting were 5 words. "You saw me." That's enough. Daniel clutched the note, understanding the message's finality. Thomas wasn't seeking reconciliation. He merely wanted acknowledgement of his existence, the very thing Daniel had denied him by walking away at the gala. And now, it seemed, Thomas had disappeared again. 1 year passed. Daniel's annual charity gala arrived again, though he'd considered cancelling it. The crystal chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton's grand ballroom seemed dimmer this time, the champagne flatter, the conversations around him mere white noise. "Mr. Whitford, will you be inviting another special guest this year?" asked a reporter, her smile practiced and predatory. Last year's surprise appearance made quite the splash. Daniel forced himself to smile. "No special guests tonight." She persisted, moving closer with her microphone. "The homeless gentleman from last year, have you kept in touch? Many called your gesture inspirational." "No comment," Daniel replied curtly, turning away. His publicist intercepted him with a concerned frown. "The Thomas Benedetti Foundation logo will be projected during your speech. The graphics team needs approval." Daniel had renamed his charitable organization 6 months ago, redirecting its focus to housing and mental health services for the homeless. Few people questioned the name change, just another billionaire's vanity project. "The logo is fine," he mumbled, scanning the room restlessly. Every bearded man made his heart race momentarily before disappointment set in. Later that night, after mechanically delivering his speech, Daniel slipped away from the gala. His driver seemed unsurprised when he requested a detour to Brooklyn. The old orphanage building had been abandoned for decades, now just a crumbling shell behind chain-link fencing. Condemned signs warned against entry, but Daniel ignored them, using wire cutters from his glove compartment to create an opening. The interior smelled of mildew and decay. His phone's flashlight cast eerie shadows as he navigated collapsed corridors and rooms that once housed dozens of children. What had once seemed enormous to a child's eyes was actually claustrophobically small. In what must have been the administrative office, Daniel found metal filing cabinets ravaged by time and water damage. Most drawers contained only mold and rodent nests, but in the very back, he discovered a metal box, surprisingly intact. Inside were children's drawings, elementary school assignments, and small craft projects, forgotten artifacts of forgotten children. Each item tagged with masking tape labels for when they come back. Daniel's hands trembled as he found items labeled TB and DB, artwork and school papers saved by some hopeful staff member who believed parents might return for their abandoned children. One crayon drawing showed 2 stick figures, one taller than the other, holding hands beside a simple house. In the corner, in a child's handwriting, "Me and Danny when we grow up." Daniel slid to the floor, clutching the drawing, sobs racking his body. Here was proof of the bond he'd forgotten, the life and love he'd been made to leave behind. A flash of blue caught his eye, something taped to another drawing, a small blue button, identical to the one he'd found at the piano, the one currently in his pocket. In his mind, a memory crystallized, the night of the fire, smoke filling their room. Thomas buttoning Daniel's coat, hands shaking, missing the last button. "Keep going, Danny. I'm right behind you." But Thomas hadn't followed. He'd gone back for others. Daniel had escaped with a missing button. Thomas had escaped with the memory of a brother he couldn't save. Back in his penthouse, Daniel stared at himself in the bathroom mirror, no longer recognizing the man he'd become. On impulse, he grabbed his phone and hit record. "My name isn't Daniel Whitford," he began. voice raw with emotion. I was born Thomas Daniel Benedetti. I'm not the successful man you think you know. I'm the boy who was left behind and who left others behind. He uploaded the video to his personal social media accounts before his rational mind could intervene. By morning, it had gone viral. His PR team called an emergency meeting, which Daniel refused to attend. His phone rang constantly until he turned it off. News vans gathered outside his building. Only his executive assistant managed to reach him, her voice concerned on the intercom. "Sir, the board is threatening to remove you as CEO if you don't issue a retraction. They're saying you've had some kind of breakdown." "Let them," Daniel replied, surprised by his own calm. "The only breakdown I've had is breaking down the walls I built to hide from myself." That afternoon, he drafted his resignation letter, signed it T.D. Benedetti, and instructed his lawyer to restructure his foundation as an independent entity that would continue without him. Then he packed a single backpack with essentials and the blue button from his childhood, leaving behind the trappings of Daniel Whitford's life. He had one mission now: to find his brother again, not to ease his conscience, but to fulfill a promise 37 years overdue. What Daniel didn't know was that across town, in a small hospital room, Thomas Benedetti was fighting for his life after collapsing from pneumonia on a subway platform, with only a worn photograph of two small boys as identification. "Your video has 15 million views," reported James Reeves, sliding a tablet across the coffee shop table. "You've become something of a folk hero overnight." Daniel, who now thought of himself as Thomas Daniel, or just TD, ignored the tablet. "Any leads on my brother?" 3 weeks had passed since his public revelation. He'd moved into a modest apartment in Brooklyn, grown a beard, and begun systematically combing the city for any trace of Thomas. "Nothing concrete," Reeves admitted. "But I've got contacts checking hospital records, shelter registrations. If he's in the system somewhere, we'll find him." "And if he doesn't want to be found?" Reeves studied him. "Then we respect his wishes. But first, we make sure he knows you're looking." TD nodded, pulling out a small notebook. "I've been leaving messages." The notebook contained locations of public pianos, church basements, and shelter bulletin boards where he'd posted handwritten notes. "I should have stayed. Danny B." "It's a start," Reeves agreed, "but we need to broaden the approach." That evening, TD visited St. Anthony's Hospital in the Bronx, following a tip about a homeless man admitted for respiratory issues. It wasn't Thomas, but the conversation with the ER doctor yielded unexpected information. "We had a piano player here about 10 years back," the doctor recalled. "Severe hypothermia, nearly died. Kept talking about his rich brother who'd forgotten him. Staff thought he was delusional." "Do you remember his name?" The doctor shook his head. "But he mentioned playing at St. Gabriel's Church, said the acoustics reminded him of somewhere from his childhood." St. Gabriel's was a Gothic revival building in East Harlem, imposing from the outside, but warm within. TD entered during evening choir practice, the voices of children echoing through the vaulted ceiling. The choir director, a young woman with kind eyes, noticed him immediately. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone who might have played piano here." "Thomas Benedetti." Recognition flickered across her face. "The street musician? Older man? Very private? He hasn't been here in months." She tilted her head, studying TD. "You look like him around the eyes." "He's my brother. I've been trying to find him." She hesitated, then gestured toward a side chapel. "He used to sit there, just listening, before he'd play. Sometimes he'd talk to Sister Margaret." Sister Margaret, nearly 80 and sharp as a tack, remembered Thomas well. "Such sorrow in his music," she mused. "He told me once he was playing for someone who couldn't hear him." "Did he mention where he was staying?" "He kept to himself, but..." She paused, considering. The last time he came, he left something. Said if anyone ever asked about him, I should give it to them. She disappeared into an office, returning with a small envelope. Inside was a scrap of paper with a simple message. If you want to find me, play our song, Where We Last Stood Together. TD stared at the words, realization dawning. The gala. The moment when Thomas had said his name and Daniel had walked away. That was where they had last stood together. The Ritz-Carlton wouldn't let him near their grand piano, not after the scandal his video had caused. But in the small park across from the hotel, the city had recently installed a public piano as part of an urban renewal project. The next day, TD sat at the weather-protected instrument, fingers hovering uncertainly above the keys. It had been decades since he'd played, and even then he'd never been good. But the lullaby, their father's lullaby, remained etched in his muscle memory. Hesitantly, he began to play, the simple melody halting at first, then flowing more naturally as forgotten pathways reawakened in his mind. Pedestrians paused, some filming with their phones. Someone whispered, "Isn't that the billionaire who quit his company?" TD played for 20 minutes, then 40. The sun began to set. He was about to give up when a shadow fell across the keys. "You remembered." Thomas's voice was rough with emotion. TD looked up, hardly believing his eyes. His brother stood before him, thinner than at the gala, his face pale beneath his weathered complexion. "Thomas," he whispered, rising from the bench. "Sit," Thomas instructed. "Finish the song." TD obeyed, playing the final measures while Thomas stood listening, eyes closed. When the last note faded, Thomas reached into his worn backpack and pulled out a pair of tiny, battered sneakers. "You wore these," he said quietly, placing them on the piano, "when you would curl up next to me on the floor at night, afraid of the dark." TD stared at the small shoes, memories flooding back. Cold nights, a thin blanket shared between them, Thomas's arm protective around his shoulders. "I looked for you," Thomas continued, "for years. But the Whitfords moved you across the country, changed your name. By the time I found any trace, you were already becoming someone else, someone who wouldn't want a reminder of where he came from." TD knelt beside the piano, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know you were alive." Thomas regarded him silently, then spoke words that would haunt TD forever. "You can pretend I never existed. But please don't pretend you didn't see me that night." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving TD kneeling beside the abandoned shoes of a childhood neither of them could reclaim. Spring arrived, painting New York with tentative color. In his Brooklyn apartment, TD pored over maps marked with X's, shelters, soup kitchens, and street corners where Thomas had been spotted but never stayed long enough for TD to reach him. It seemed his brother was deliberately staying one step ahead, acknowledging TD's search while refusing to be found. A painful game of cat and mouse between two damaged men. The children's shoes sat on TD's makeshift desk, a constant reminder of what had been lost. Beside them lay the blue button, now attached to a simple cord he wore around his neck. His phone rang. James Reeves with another lead. "There's a young girl from St. Gabriel's choir looking for you, says she has a message." An hour later, TD sat across from Lucia, a solemn 12-year-old with wise eyes. She clutched a folded paper in her small hands. "Mr. Piano Man asked me to give you this if you came back to the church," she explained. "He said you'd understand." TD unfolded the note carefully. Inside was a single line. "Don't look for me. Play our childhood song if you want to see me again." "When did he give you this?" TD asked, hope surging. "Last week. He played for our choir practice. Said he was leaving town, but had to tie up loose ends first." Leaving town. The thought sent panic through TD's chest. After all this searching, was he too late? Did he say where he was going? Lucia shook her head. But he left something else. She reached into her backpack and withdrew a dog-eared book, The Little Prince, by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Inside the front cover, an inscription, "To my little brother, remember what is essential is invisible to the eye. T." TD ran his fingers over the faded ink. This was mine. He gave it to me for my 4th birthday, just before the fire. He said it was important that you got it back. That night, TD returned to the public piano near the Ritz-Carlton. Though it was nearly midnight, he began to play their father's lullaby, his fingers stronger and more certain than before. He played for an hour, ignoring confused glances from late-night pedestrians. Just as he was about to give up, a familiar figure appeared from the shadows. Thomas looked worse than before, thinner, paler, his breathing labored, but his eyes were clear as he sat beside TD on the piano bench. "You're persistent," Thomas remarked. "Always were, even as a kid." "You were leaving," TD said, "without saying goodbye." "What's to say? We're strangers who share DNA and some bad memories." "And good ones," TD countered. "You teaching me to tie my shoes. You giving me the last piece of bread at dinner. You reading to me when I couldn't sleep." Thomas's hands drifted to the piano keys, picking out a simple melody. Memories fade, life goes on. Not for me, not anymore. TD pulled out the children's shoes. "These were mine?" Thomas nodded. "I saved them from the orphanage, kept them all these years." "Why?" "Because someone needed to remember who you were before you became Daniel Whitford." Thomas coughed, a deep, racking sound that shook his entire frame. "You're sick," TD said, alarmed. "Let me help you." "I don't need—" "Not as Daniel Whitford," TD interrupted, "as your brother, as Danny Benedetti." Something shifted in Thomas's expression, a crack in the wall of resentment he'd built over decades. "There's nothing you can do. Doctor says it's advanced COPD, complicated by pneumonia. Years of sleeping rough in winter does that to you. There are treatment specialists." "For what? To extend this?" Thomas gestured at himself. "I made my peace with this life long ago. I just wanted—" He trailed off. "Wanted what?" Thomas looked at him, vulnerability finally breaking through. "To know you remembered me. That I wasn't just a ghost haunting only myself." TD reached for his brother's hand, rough, calloused, so different from his own manicured fingers. "I remember now, everything, and I'm not letting you disappear again." Thomas studied their hands, one weathered by hardship, one softened by privilege. "It's too late for us, Danny." "No," TD insisted. "It's too late for Daniel Whitford, but not for Thomas and Danny Benedetti." Thomas reached into his pocket and withdrew a worn pair of childish drawings, stick figures labeled Tommy and Danny, standing beside a house with a comically large piano inside. "You drew this," Thomas said softly. "The night before the fire. You said we'd live there together when we grew up." TD stared at the crayon drawing, another memory clicking into place. "And you promised we'd always be together. That nothing could separate us." "I failed you," Thomas whispered, his voice breaking. "No," TD replied firmly. "The world failed us both." As dawn broke over the city, two broken men sat shoulder to shoulder at a street piano, playing a simple melody that bridged 37 years of separation. Neither knew if reconciliation was possible, but for the first time, both dared to hope. What they couldn't know was that a passerby had filmed their reunion. By nightfall, their story would captivate millions, bringing consequences neither brother could anticipate. I'll continue the story, maintaining 5,000 characters per chapter and following your guidelines for storytelling. The viral video transformed them both overnight. Billionaire reunites with homeless brother became the heartwarming story everyone wanted to believe in. a fairy tale of reconciliation in a cynical age. TD hated it. The invasion of their privacy, the saccharine commentary, the focus on his wealth versus Thomas's poverty. None of it captured the complex reality of their fractured relationship, but the attention brought unexpected benefits. A specialist in respiratory medicine reached out, offering Thomas experimental treatment at no cost. Major donors pledged support to the Thomas Benedetti Foundation, expanding its programs for homeless individuals with health issues. Thomas, however, remained skeptical of the sudden goodwill. "They don't care about me," he told TD during a hospital visit. "They care about the story. The moment we stop being entertaining, they'll forget us." TD couldn't argue. He'd lived long enough in the spotlight to know its fickle nature. After Thomas was discharged, TD offered him the guest room in his Brooklyn apartment. To his surprise, Thomas accepted, though he brought only his backpack and worn coat, ready to leave at a moment's notice. "This is temporary," Thomas insisted, "until I figure out my next move." TD nodded, not pushing further. Each day together was a gift he hadn't dared hope for. They established a careful routine, like strangers sharing space rather than brothers. Thomas took his medications, rested, and occasionally played the small keyboard TD had purchased. TD worked remotely, managing the foundation's transition and his own legal affairs. On official documents that crossed his desk, TD began signing his name as Thomas D. Benedetti, a small act of reclamation that felt profoundly right. 2 months into this tenuous arrangement, TD received notice that the original Brooklyn orphanage property was scheduled for demolition and redevelopment. Without consulting Thomas, he purchased the entire block. "What are you planning to build?" Thomas asked when TD shared the news. "Another corporate headquarters? Luxury condos?" "Nothing," TD answered. "I'm leaving it vacant. Just a bench and a piano." Thomas studied him, suspicious. "Why?" "Because some places shouldn't be forgotten." TD hesitated, then added, "And some people shouldn't be replaced." The following Sunday, TD visited the property alone. Demolition crews had cleared most structures, leaving an empty lot surrounded by chain-link fencing. He sat on a temporary bench he'd had installed, staring at the space where their childhood had unfolded. He returned every week afterward, sometimes playing a single note on the weatherproof piano he'd commissioned, sometimes just sitting in silence. On the 5th visit, he arrived to find Thomas already there, fingers dancing across the keys of the piano, playing their father's lullaby. They didn't speak. TD simply sat beside his brother, listening as the melody filled the empty space where their lives had first been torn apart. Slowly, Thomas began joining TD on his weekly pilgrimages. They rarely talked much during these visits. Both men of few words, but the silence between them gradually transformed from tense to comfortable. One drizzly Tuesday, Thomas handed TD an envelope as they sat on the bench. "Found this in a storage unit I kept years ago. Thought you should have it." Inside was a birth certificate, Daniel Thomas Benedetti, born April 17, 1980, to Maria and Robert Benedetti, the name that had been erased when the Whitfords adopted him. TD stared at the document, tracing his finger over the name. "My middle name was Thomas. Mom named you after me," Thomas explained quietly. "Dad wanted Robert Jr., but she insisted. Said we were connected from the start. The certificate had been altered, the original name crossed out, and Daniel Edward Whitford written above it in faded ink. They tried to erase everything," TD whispered. "They couldn't erase what matters," Thomas replied, gesturing between them. TD carefully folded the certificate and placed it in his wallet. He made no comment about it, but the following week, when signing foundation documents, he used Daniel Thomas Benedetti for the first time. The next day, his lawyer called, concerned. "The board is questioning the signature discrepancy. What should I tell them?" "Tell them I'm reclaiming my identity," TD replied. "The money's still good, even with a different name on the checks." That night, TD found Thomas at the piano, playing a complex piece he didn't recognize. "Chopin?" TD guessed. Thomas shook his head. "Something I've been working on. It's called Brothers." "It's beautiful," TD said, meaning it. "It's not finished yet." Thomas's fingers stilled on the keys. "Like us." TD considered this. "Will it ever be?" "Some compositions take a lifetime," Thomas replied, a hint of a smile softening his weathered face, "especially the important ones." Later that week, TD received an alert from the Foundation's media team. A local news station was running a "Where Are They Now" segment about the Benedetti brothers, contrasting their viral moment with their current low profile. "Should we issue a statement?" his assistant asked. "No," TD decided. "Some stories don't belong to the public." Neither brother knew that across town, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist was uncovering uncomfortable truths about the Whitford family, revelations that would force both men to confront not just their shared past, but the darker secrets that had kept them apart for 37 years. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, addressed to the Foundation's office in Thomas's handwriting. "PS 118 in the Bronx is seeking donations for their music program. Thought you might be interested. T." TD recognized it for what it was. An olive branch, Thomas's way of showing he was starting to trust his brother's intentions. The public school served one of the city's poorest neighborhoods. Its music program had been gutted by budget cuts, leaving outdated instruments and no full-time instructor. After a brief investigation, TD arranged an anonymous donation of $250,000, enough for new instruments, renovations to the music room, and a 3-year salary for a dedicated teacher. Principal Elena Vasquez was skeptical when the Foundation representative delivered the news. "Anonymous donors don't exist in neighborhoods like ours," she said flatly. "What's the catch?" "No catch," the representative assured her. "The donor simply believes in music education." 2 weeks later, Principal Vasquez tracked down TD. At the Foundation offices, determination written across her face. "Mr. Benedetti," she began, "I don't appreciate being lied to. My students deserve to know who believes in them." TD smiled ruefully. "The donation wasn't from me. Don't play games. It was my idea," he clarified, "but the money came from the Foundation. I'm just the middleman." Principal Vasquez studied him carefully. "We're hosting a small ceremony when the renovations are complete. The students would like to thank their benefactor." "I'm not comfortable with public recognition," TD explained. "I didn't make the donation to get my name on a plaque." "Then why did you do it?" TD hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because my brother suggested it." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "The piano player? The one from the video?" TD nodded. "He came to our school last month," she revealed. "Played our old upright even though half the keys were broken. The kids loved him." An idea formed in TD's mind. Would you be interested in a part-time music teacher, someone with unconventional training but genuine talent? The following Monday, Thomas stood outside PS 118, anxiety evident in his rigid posture. Despite TD's encouragement, he'd nearly backed out 3 times that morning. "I'm not qualified," he'd protested. "I never had formal training." "You've been playing for 40 years, TD countered. "You have more to offer these kids than any conservatory graduate." Now, watching from his car across the street, TD saw his brother square his shoulders and enter the building. Something tightened in his chest. Pride mixed with sorrow for all the years Thomas's gifts had gone unrecognized. He waited an hour, then couldn't resist checking on his brother. Slipping into the school, he followed the sound of piano music to a freshly painted classroom where 20 elementary students sat in a semicircle around Thomas. Music isn't about being perfect, Thomas was explaining, his voice gentle but firm. It's about expressing what's inside you, the joy, the pain, all of it. A small girl raised her hand. But what if I make mistakes? Mistakes are part of the music, Thomas assured her. Sometimes the wrong note leads to something even more beautiful. TD remained in the doorway, unnoticed, as Thomas demonstrated simple exercises. His brother's patience with the children revealed a softer side TD had glimpsed only in fragments of memory. Thomas teaching him to tie his shoes, to count, to be brave in the dark. As the lesson ended, a boy in the back row raised his hand. "Mr. B, are you really the brother of that famous rich guy from the video?" "My mum says you are." Thomas froze momentarily, glancing toward the door where he finally spotted TD. Their eyes met in silent communication. "I don't know if I'm brother to a famous man," Thomas replied thoughtfully. "But he is my brother." The distinction wasn't lost on TD, who felt both humbled and forgiven in that single sentence. After the children filed out, Thomas approached, a question in his eyes. "How was I?" "Perfect," TD answered sincerely. "Those kids adore you already." "I've never taught before." "You taught me," TD reminded him. "Everything important anyway." For the first time since their reunion, Thomas smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "I'll see you at home." Home. The word hung between them, newly significant. "I'll make dinner," TD promised. As he drove back to Brooklyn, TD realized Thomas had given him a gift far greater than reconciliation. By thriving in this new role, by sharing his talent rather than hiding it, Thomas was finally allowing himself to be seen. And for the first time since the night of the gala, TD felt he was truly seeing his brother too, not as a reminder of his guilt or a ghost from his past, but as the remarkable man he'd become, despite everything. That evening, as they ate dinner in companionable silence, Thomas slid a small notebook across the table. Inside were handwritten compositions, decades of original music created in shelters, on street corners, in borrowed moments at public pianos. "I want the foundation to publish these," Thomas said quietly, "not with my name, with our father's, Robert Benedetti." "Dad's music died with him," TD said, confused. Thomas shook his head. "These are based on fragments I remember him playing. It's taken me years, but I've reconstructed most of his compositions." TD leafed through the notebook, recognition stirring at certain melodic phrases. "This is incredible, Thomas." "It's my legacy," Thomas explained. "Maybe the only one I'll have." The words hung heavy in the air, a reminder of Thomas's fragile health and uncertain future. But before TD could respond, his phone chimed with a news alert. "Whitford family scandal. Court records reveal illegal adoption and deliberate family separation." The brothers' hard-won peace was about to be shattered by revelations neither was prepared to face. 6 months passed in a blur of depositions, medical appointments, and uncomfortable revelations. The journalists' investigation had unearthed court documents proving the Whitfords had deliberately separated the brothers, paying officials to falsify Thomas's death certificate and expedite Daniel's adoption. Their motives remained unclear. Perhaps they simply wanted a younger child without complications, or perhaps Daniel's striking resemblance to their deceased son made him the preferred choice. Whatever their reasoning, the illegal separation had altered both brothers' lives irrevocably. The scandal dominated headlines for weeks before fading into the background of public consciousness. But for the Benedetti brothers, its impact lingered in quiet conversations and unanswered questions. Thomas's health deteriorated despite the experimental treatments. His lungs, damaged by decades of exposure and untreated illness, couldn't recover fully. Good days mingled with bad ones, each passing week making it clearer that their reunion had come too late. On a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after their reconciliation at the street piano, Thomas collapsed in the kitchen of their shared apartment. The stroke was massive and unforgiving. TD sat beside his hospital bed for 3 days, holding his brother's hand as machines monitored his failing body. Thomas never regained consciousness. The funeral was small and private, just as Thomas would have wanted. No media, no fanfare, only a handful of people who had known the real man, Principal Vasquez and several students, Sister Margaret from St. Gabriel's, a few musicians who had shared street corners with him over the years. TD stood alone at the grave long after the others had departed. The simple headstone read, Thomas Robert Benedetti, beloved brother, musician, teacher. What is essential is invisible to the eye. Beside the polished granite, TD placed a weathered pair of child's sneakers and a small blue button. In the months that followed, TD moved mechanically through his days, fulfilling his brother's final requests. The Thomas Benedetti Foundation expanded its focus to include music education in underserved communities. Thomas's compositions, published under their father's name, gained modest recognition in classical music circles. PS 118 renamed its music room the Benedetti Studio, with a small plaque commemorating their unlikely teacher. TD visited the Brooklyn orphanage site every Sunday, though he no longer played the piano there. Instead, he sat in silence, holding conversations in his mind with the brother he'd found too late. 1 year after Thomas's death, TD received an unexpected call from Principal Vasquez. "We're having a small concert tonight," she explained. "The children want to play the pieces Mr. B taught them. They've been practicing for months." TD hadn't planned to attend. Public appearances still made him uncomfortable, but something in her voice convinced him. That evening, he slipped into the back row of the school auditorium as 20 children took their places on stage. Some at keyboards, others with violins, flutes and cellos donated by the foundation. The music began tentatively, then gained confidence, a piece TD recognized from Thomas's notebook. The children played with technical imperfection, but genuine emotion, just as Thomas had taught them. After the performance, as parents and teachers mingled over refreshments, TD made his way to the upright piano in the corner of the room. Without thinking, he began to play the lullaby, his father's melody, Thomas's legacy. A small boy approached, watching his fingers move across the keys. "That's Mr. B's song," the child observed. TD nodded, continuing to play softly. "Are you the one from the video? His brother?" "Yes," TD admitted. The boy studied him thoughtfully. "Is that song yours now?" TD's hands stilled on the keys as he considered the question. "It was his," he answered finally. "Now it's ours." He smiled, though his eyes grew damp. "Would you like to learn it?" The boy nodded eagerly, climbing onto the bench beside him. As TD guided the child's small hands across the keys, teaching the simple melody that had connected 3 generations of Benedetti men, he felt something shift within his chest, a loosening of the grief that had compressed his heart for months. The next morning, TD visited Thomas's grave, placing fresh flowers beside the headstone. For the first time, he spoke aloud to his brother. "I'm teaching them your music," he said softly. "Our music now." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead. Perhaps coincidence, perhaps acknowledgement. That afternoon, in a quiet ceremony witnessed only by his lawyer, TD legally changed his name back to Daniel Thomas Benedetti. Not because he rejected the years he'd lived as Daniel Whitford, but because he finally understood what Thomas had tried to tell him all along. Names could be taken away, fortunes gained and lost, but the connection between brothers, even when stretched across decades of separation, remained unbreakable. As winter approached, Daniel continued his Sunday visits to the orphanage site. But now, instead of sitting alone, he brought Thomas's students, teaching them to play on the public piano their teacher had so loved. And for the first time since Thomas's death, Daniel played their father's lullaby from beginning to end, letting the notes carry his grief into the crisp air. As the final chord faded, he opened the piano bench and placed the original composition inside, a gift for whoever might discover it. Walking away, Daniel realized that Thomas had given him one final lesson, that sometimes what matters most is what remains unsaid, carried instead in the spaces between notes, in the silence after the music ends, in the love that survives even death. Some names are inherited, others are chosen, but the most powerful ones are the names we fight to keep alive. This story reminds us that no matter how much we try to run from the past, it has a way of finding us, not to punish, but to offer a second chance. Anthony learned too late that erasing a name doesn't erase love, and that silence often speaks louder than denial. Family is not just who you claim, but who you show up for, especially when it's uncomfortable. So we ask you, what names have you almost forgotten, and who might be waiting for you to say them again? If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Like this video and comment below telling us where you're watching from, your city or country. It helps us create even better stories for you. And don't miss the next story. We've selected it for you, and it's right here on the end screen. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of this journey. Sometimes a name carries the weight of a life we tried to forget. This story wasn't just about a billionaire and a homeless man. It was about two brothers, torn apart by fate and reunited by truth. It showed us that even after decades of silence, a single note, a shared memory, or a small blue button can awaken what we thought was lost forever. It reminded us that success means nothing without someone to share it with, and that healing often begins the moment we dare to remember. What if the person you've spent years trying to forget has spent every year trying to find you? What did this story make you feel? If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any new stories. Leave a like and tell us in the comments which country or city you're watching from. It helps us create better, more meaningful content for you. And don't forget to click on the final card on your screen to watch the next recommended story.